Right, so for those of you wondering when we're going to see the MacBook Pros and the Mac Mini with the M2 chips launch, there are new details from Mark Gurman, so of course, let's delve into it. Right, so many of us were expecting both iPads and Macs to launch together via press releases in just a few weeks, but Gurman says that's not going to be the case, and we could see the iPads and the Macs launch separately instead. So Gurman says the M2 iPad Pro and the new budget iPads should launch in just a few days, but the new Macs could launch in November instead. Now this initially was confusing, but to be honest, now thinking about it, it does kinda make sense. For one, we have seen Mac releases in November in the past. For example, the M1 event, that was in November, but also the 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro was released via press release on November 13, I believe. So yeah, there is a lot of evidence pointing towards Mac releases in November in Apple's recent history. And to be honest, even if these refreshes are pretty minor for the most part, there is still going to be a ton of coverage on these iPads and Macs, and so having two separate waves of press attention for these products does make sense. Anyways, Gurman does say macOS Ventura should still release with iPadOS 16.1 on the 24th, but they should add support for these new Macs. Now, in case you're wondering about the upgrades with these Macs, really the only change is going to be the chip. Gurman does say there are no design changes for the Mac Mini or the MacBook Pro, which does make sense because the MacBook Pros just saw a massive refresh, and Apple generally keeps around the same MacBook design with spec bumps for at least 4 to 5 years. So yes, M2, M3, M4, maybe even M5 is going to keep the current design we have. And as for the Mac Mini, number one, this is a low volume product, so there's no point redesigning this. It's also a box, so redesigning this is kinda pointless, but also people use these on server racks, and so for those upgrading their Mac Minis, they need the dimensions of the new version to be the same. Now as for the chips themselves, they are going to be pretty minor upgrades. Basically it's going to be like the jump from M1 to M2, so of course reasonable performance upgrades, but nothing major, and those who have M1 models can keep those Macs. However, I am glad Apple's finally killing off the Intel Space Gray Mac Mini in the range, and they're giving us an M2 Pro Mac Mini instead. And I can see that being very popular for those who just need a bit more performance than the M1, but of course, the Mac Studio's overkill. Now coming back to the MacBooks, I am hoping for new colours. I think midnight for the MacBook Pro would look nice. Also maybe better battery life, but ultimately don't expect major upgrades. And yeah, that's why Apple's doing press releases. These Macs are not worthy enough to be on stage, and so Apple's better off doing a low-key press release and saving their marketing budget for, of course, the Jan event, where we should see the VR headset. I will say though that there is a very small chance we do actually see an event if Apple does introduce the Mac Pro, because that definitely is a flagship product and would get many of us excited, and so I could see that headlining a November event and then Apple releasing alongside it these minor Mac refreshes. But if we don't get the Mac Pro, then yes, do expect press releases for these Macs. Anyways, let's delve into your comments regarding future Macs. So JD is wondering about the fan noise with the M2 and M2 Pro Mac Mini, and I do believe that for most use cases, there might be slightly more fan noise because the M2 does seem to be running hotter than the M1 chip due to the high TDP, so I do think it's fair to say we can expect the same with the M2 Pro chip. But do remember, this is still going to be a lot quieter than the Intel machines, and also of course for those getting the M2 models, I'm sure that for light use, there will still basically be no fan noise. It's just that for more intensive work, where the increased GPU cores could come into play, that could increase the fan noise. So Apple Sheep 125 says, they do not believe the jack is going with the Mac Mini, and I agree with this completely, because the Mac Mini has terrible speakers, it needs to be connected to peripherals, and so having a headphone jack's gonna be pretty important, and I doubt that Apple's gonna force us to use Bluetooth with the Mac Mini. Like if Apple was to remove the headphone jack with the Mac, I think that would be the MacBook Air, because for the target audience, most of them are regular consumers using AirPods, and so they could care less about the headphone jack. But yes, the M2 Mac Mini should keep the jack. So Chipotle Man says, damn, I was hoping for a redesign. I guess I'll keep my M1 Mac Mini and see what happens. Just upgraded to the 1TB 16GB unified memory version 2 and it's been excellent. Loads of good deals on them on Amazon right now. I even saw the 2TB version for $1,700. And yes, Mac Mini deals from third parties have been excellent. And yeah, to be honest, much like the M2 MacBook Air, I do think the M1 model is going to cannibalize sales of the M2 version because there are just so many good deals out there from third parties that are way below retail price. Since, like I discussed in my MacBook Air videos, the M2 version being $11.99 retail and of course the M1 being way below that at around $849 through retailers, that does make the M2 version hard to justify, especially since the actual upgrades with the M2 chip really are not that major. So yeah, I do think that's going to be the case with this Mac Mini because while I'm sure there will not be any price hikes with the M2 version, I'm also sure there's going to be major discounts on the M1 version, deals that are even better than they are right now, so of course, that's going to be pretty compelling for most consumers. So Alien AI 2.0 says, not excited for the upcoming price hikes for these MacBook Pros. Now, if you're referring to the US, I don't think there's going to be price hikes there because we were predicting the 14 series would get price hikes, but that was not the case. And so yes, I doubt such minor refreshes to the MacBook Pros are going to warrant a price hike. However, if you're referring to the rest of the world, then yes, we could see price hikes. We saw major price hikes with the 14 series, and so I'm pretty anxious about the pricing for these Macs, and if it's really outrageous, I think you're better off getting the 2021 models. So Tom and Tech hopes M2 Pro, Max and Ultra are 3nm since M2 was a lackluster refresh, and they want bigger upgrades. And yes, I'm also hoping for the same because for the most part, the M2 Pro /Max, that's a mouthful, but anyways, these Macs are gonna be pretty boring because the Mac Mini and the MacBook Pro are not getting new designs, and so the chip upgrades have to be the main USP. So of course, to make up for the lack of upgrades, I'm hoping Apple does give us chips based on the 3nm process. So Opus Digital Audio says, I want an M2 Tornado chip, and yeah, I know they're joking, but I do honestly think there is a small chance Apple does go with that, especially with how ridiculous Apple's naming scheme is becoming with their chips. Anyways, that's about it, but of course, tell me your thoughts regarding these reports in the comments. Anyways, thank you for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. Check out the video link above on details regarding the iPhone 15 series. And on that note, see ya peeps.